Like a grand and miraculous spaceship, our planet has sailed through the universe of time.
Like a grand and miraculous spaceship.
Grand and miraculous.
Grand and miraculous.
I think with the Muppets, there's sort of an innocence to them, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that appeals to the child in everybody. Because I think everybody understands the child still.
Well, we all want to build a time machine, Doc. So when you enter Disneyland, you're entering a time machine.
I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse.
Hey, everybody, we made it. Thank you so much for being here. This is a big night for me. This is the grand opening of our new channel, Grand and Miraculous. I hope that we all are here to have some fun. For those of you who don't know me, my name's John. I go by Spaceship Ears. I'm so grateful to everybody who contributed and helped out along the way. There have been so many great people who have been mentors and supporters and people who have pushed me, up to this mic here. And I can't thank everybody nearly enough. Let me just call out some names really quick, although there are many others. Pete McDevitt, thank you so much, sir. You guys have essentially been pioneers, and I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Monorail Molly, you're the best. You've given me so much advice. Bitritz, Dave's Disney Dreams, Mike Beachman, Dame Dystopia, Debbie Bernfeld, Pirate Queen Trish. There's so many other folks here in chat as part of this community who I'm very, very grateful for your help. And rest assured, if I didn't call your name, don't worry about it. You are in my heart just as much as anyone else. So let me talk a little bit about why we're here and what encouraged me to do such a thing. The whole idea of this channel is to unveil the magic behind theme park attractions. We want to explore their creators, their immersive worlds, and the moments that keep us coming back. With your voice shaping the journey. As I'll come and talk about this in a bit, this is not just about me. This is not just my voice monologuing for an hour. I am here to set a few pillars here that we can evaluate these attractions by, and then we can all contribute our voice to figure out, hey, what is it about these things that really make them tick? I firmly believe these attractions are not just rides. We don't line up for hours to go sit on a carousel or to, essentially go through what what everyday folks would consider just a ride. These are cultural artifacts. I would put these attractions up against any other great piece of art that can hang up in any museum, and I'll stand by that. You may think, oh my gosh, John, you're crazy. You know, people go into a room full of mechanical birds and you're comparing that to Michelangelo and Raphael. Yes, absolutely. And there are reasons for that I'll get into. What is it about these essentially dark boxes that we spend hours to talk about and to line up for? What makes them tick? And that's part of what I want to explore a little bit as part of this show. Let me just call out Pete for a moment. Pete McDevitt just had a fantastic interview with James Warda, And James was talking very emotionally about having an emotional experience on Flight of Passage. And that kind of gets to the core of what we're here for, what we want to talk about. Why is it that we all have these shared experiences? And what makes these experiences work? Let me just see if I could toss my first link in chat, but please go watch James Warda if you haven't. It was a fantastic interview, and I take my hat off to Pete. So I thought long and hard about which attraction we should tackle first, and I had to go with Peter Pan's Flight. Now you may ask, John, you know, your dad did Spaceship Earth, you know, you've been involved in so many other big e-ticket attractions. Why is it that you want to tackle Peter Pan first? Well, for one thing, I got to get sentimental. It is my dad's favorite. So there is that. And it's one of the most beloved and loved Fantasyland attractions of all time. More importantly, it helps introduce some of the concepts and some key Imagineers that we'll be referring to repeatedly throughout this series. You're going to hear some names tonight, like Marvin Davis and Ken Anderson and some other folks that you'll hear over and over again. And these names will start to reinforce the creative vision that they brought to these attractions. So to kick things off, let me take this banner off, and I'll start it off with a trivia question. So what was the first ticket category when Peter Pan's Flight first opened in 1955? I assume you all are familiar with the old style tickets where they had letters. Peter Pan's Flight, as we'll get into, was an opening day attraction at Disneyland. What do you think the original ticket category was for it? Go ahead and punch in your idea in chat, and then we can talk about the answer later on. So let me say first, while you guys are talking about that, I'll say hi to folks in chat. There's so many great friends here. I can't begin to welcome them all, but let me start off at the very top, if I may, with Leanne, Christy, Mike, Dame Dystopia, Dave, Debbie. Let's see. It's me, David T. Thank you for being here, David. Pirate Queen Trish. Pete McDevitt. There he is. Captain, my captain. Fred O'Malley. Thank you for being here, Fred. Jason Thibodeau. I'm so grateful that you're here. Debbie's here. Corby Sinclair is here. Thank you, Corby. Fire Dragon 57. Lamont Gray, how are you, sir? Hope all is well. Let's see. Bitritz is here. Thank you, Bitritz, for all the help you've given me. Katie Y is here. So many great people. And I'll come back to chat. Kelly Maza is here. So many great people that I'm scrolling through. And I'm so grateful for all of you to be here. So let me take this down, and then we'll switch over to our presentation. So tonight we're going to talk about Peter Pan, and we'll go through some interesting things about the attraction while we're at it. So first and foremost, let me do a quick introduction. Welcome to my channel. You know, you've all seen Muppet Vision when Rizzo the rat comes along and says, hello, welcome to my park. Well, welcome to my channel. As I've mentioned, the whole purpose of this channel is to unveil the magic behind theme park attractions. Let's explore their creators, their immersive worlds, and the moments that keep us coming back with your voice help shaping the journey. If any of you remember the old school e-ticket magazine that Disneyland used to sell, that's my kind of North Star goal, is to be one of those digital e-ticket magazines online. We're going to cover the attraction history as well as analyze whether it works or not. There will be some attractions that are obvious, clear winners, and there are some that aren't. And that's not to cast stones or to talk badly about these attractions, But we need to start teasing these attractions apart a little bit and figure out what is it that makes them work or not. To paraphrase the famous line from Maelstrom in Epcot, I am not the first to pass this way, nor shall I be the last. There are many people who have forged this way before by talking about these attractions. There are many people who will come after me, and yeah, I welcome them. I'm just hopeful that I'll be able to provide my 2 cents and that it'll be somewhat interesting. Just please keep in mind that I'll sometimes be a little bit more Rizzo than Mickey, so please forgive any rough edges. This is my first time at this, and I welcome any feedback that you guys have afterwards. So again, who am I? What the heck am I up here doing this in front of a mic? Well, I have some amazing family members. I come from a phenomenally gifted family. I have to everybody in my family is fantastic, but I have to talk about 2 people in particular. One is my grandfather, John F. DeCure Sr. He was an award-winning production designer, frequently referred to as quote unquote Hollywood's Da Vinci. Now, this is not a minor accolade. You know, you might think, oh my gosh, what did he do to deserve that? Well, for one thing, he was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, which is not very frequent. And he won 3 of them for films Cleopatra, The King and I, and Hello, Dolly. He set an exceptionally high standard in production design. His meticulously hand-painted sets and attention to detail really impacted the industry as a whole. There were a few cases where he almost bankrupted major studios, but we'll talk about that another time. He was also a master of perspective. The man could envision a scene in his head, and when it came time to put pencil to paper, he was able to just nail the perspective exactly to the T, and we'll talk about more about that later. When it comes to Disney, he was the art director for Hall of Presidents. He worked on Mickey Mouse Revue, Universe of Energy, and Epcot Space Pavilion. Now, I want to point out, this is not Mission Space. Some of you may not know, but there was a Space Pavilion plan for Epcot long before Horizons was there. And this Space Pavilion had massive scale. Essentially, it would have been we'll talk about it more later, but it would have been essentially, if you know the Circle Vision 360-degree theaters, the idea was to take 2 of these, not just one, but 2 of them, stack them on top of each other like a cake, and then spin the whole thing so that the audience inside could feel like they're part of a space expedition. Suffice to say, this was a little bit too grand for Disney's pocketbook at the time. So unfortunately, I put back on the shelf, but there are some aspects of it that still live along. One of his mantras that he continually spoke about was write the book. In other words, let's tease these concepts apart, these visual concepts and these ideas. Let's tease them apart and figure out what is it that makes them work. And let's codify them. Let's write them down in a book. And then future generations can take these core ideas, these best practices they can think of in terms of visual storytelling and design, and figure out, okay, what are the ones and zeros, for lack of a better phrase, of these experiences? How do we get people to take these core ideas and to carry them forward? That was one of his biggest regrets in life, is that he never really got the time to really sit down and quote unquote write the book. So that's something that inspired me. As to the degree that I can tease some of these ideas apart, this is kind of a tribute to him. Of course, I have another family member who's fantastic, my father, John F. DeCure Jr., who some of you have seen interviewed on Pete McDevitt's show. Again, thank you, Pete. My father was a production designer on films as well, like Top Gun, Fright Night. He was art director on Ghostbusters. And he had deep impact on Disney history. He was one of the core Epcot designers that came on board shortly after Walt died. And he was responsible for the design of Spaceship Earth, of Communicore, the World City model. He worked on themed resorts like the Contemporary, the Polynesian, reinforcing the signature narrative style that Disney was trying to come across with. In fact, if some of you remember this far back, the Contemporary Resort had some famous orange plastic trees in the lobby. That was his deal. So you can blame him for the orange trees. He extended his creative expertise later on to other projects, including Muppet Vision 3D. Let's all pour one out for Muppet Vision, huh? And Alien Encounter, demonstrating versatility and forward-thinking attraction design. Again, I'll refer you to Pete's interview with my dad. Maybe at some point we'll have him on and we can talk about some attractions in more detail. So that's my father. What about me? You know, why the heck am I up here in front of a mic talking? Well, for one thing, I'm a lifelong Disney fan. I grew up with that bug. I'm a tech geek. I'm in the software industry, and people may ask, oh my gosh, John, with such a heritage, how did you not end up in art yourself? Well, there's one problem. When I was very young, like 3, 4, 5 years old, I don't remember exactly when, my dad came home with a Atari 800 computer, which you may remember back in the old days, didn't do very much, but it let you program in BASIC and it let you play games. And my eyes lit up like you wouldn't believe. At that point, I was hooked. And I knew from that point on, these amazing machines that can accomplish so much was just unbearably attractive to me. So I blame my dad for that. Thank you, Dad, if you're out listening, for my current career trajectory. The good news is that my daughter seems to have picked up the art gene, so she's carrying on the family history. She's pursuing her digital art degree, and I'm very proud of her and my son as well. I kind of grew up at the exits in Disneyland, and let me describe what I mean by that. When I was little, many people, when they lined up at the park, they would go and run to the entrances of their favorite attractions, as well they should. I went to the exits. The reason for that is that my dad took me to the exits of these attractions. He pulled out a stopwatch, and then we started counting people. 1, 2, 3, 4. How long did it take for 5 people to exit? And what that taught me was all about attraction throughput. It taught me about how to most effectively put people through these experiences. And more important than anything, I saw people's faces light up. They were happy. They were delighted coming out of those rides. And I got to know and love each of these attractions, almost like, my own children. The ability of these dark boxes that we all wait hours to walk into had an indelible impact on people. And that's something that truly impacted me. As far as the online community goes, I discovered all of you lovely people at the beginning of the pandemic, like many other people. I chose a username Spaceship Ears. It's a tribute to my dad, since he designed Spaceship Earth. It's also a fun pun, so there's always that. I made some lifelong friends. You guys know who you are in chat. I'm very, very grateful that you guys are here. And I pledge to continue on that friendship. I thought I might be able to provide an interesting little spin to these attractions that we all know and love. We all love our streamer friends who go through the parks and go through these attractions, and we love watching them over and over again. I thought it might be interesting to tease some of these apart a little bit. And I want to emphasize, my opinion is just one opinion of many. There's nothing special about me. So one of the things I really want to do is to encourage you to contribute your voice. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. By the way, this is a labor of love. I'm not, famous last words, but I don't intend to monetize this channel. I intend to provide some interesting aspects to these attractions that we all know and love. If you happen to align with the message that I'm trying to convey, and you want to see some of these attractions memorialized in a more permanent way, I'd encourage you to find a good charity to contribute to. One of them that I love dearly is Lake Buena Vista Historical Society. They put on a every few years show called Retro Magic, and they invite theme park Imagineers and amazing people to the stage to talk about these attractions. They do a phenomenal job. I'd encourage you to donate to them. Go check out their websites, lbvhistory.org. And they're coming up with a new show, Retro Magic, in September, I believe. So if you're interested in this kind of attraction lore, that's catnip for those of us who love this stuff. So I'd encourage you to look into that. Let's talk methodology a little bit. This may seem like an impossible task. Evaluating theme park attractions is so subjective. Everybody has their own likes. Everybody has their own dislikes. How in the world can we possibly dissect these emotional feelings into something less subjective and more objective? I'm going to take a whack at it. May not be the perfect whack at it, but I'm going to assert that we can divide our perceptions of these attractions into three, what I'm calling pillars. These pillars are what I consider table stakes to the success or failure of any good attraction. First is immersion. You may have heard that word a lot. You've heard it a lot in Pete's interview earlier. Immersion is how much do we feel a part of the experience that we're going through. Second is storytelling. At the end of the day, if there's no story being told, there's no purpose. The purpose of going through these attractions is to communally feel and experience a good story. And then finally is delight. At the end of the day, we're supposed to be entertained by these cultural artifacts, right? If a theme park attraction is not delightful, then, it has issues. It's got to have that fun factor, in other words. Let me dive into a little bit more detail here. So immersion can be thought of in a couple different ways. One is theming, architectural and artistic elements. What design choices were made to immerse visitors in the experience? For instance, you can think of landscaping, props, design. Motion is one of them. Does a ride vehicle or movement match the theme? For example, a smooth glide like on Soaring might suit a magical story, but if you have big jerky movements, for example, Indiana Jones Adventure, it could mimic a bumpy escape from danger. What about the transitions? Are there seamless transitions between different scenes or elements, ensuring that guests remain immersed throughout the ride? Sound, temperature, and lighting is something that people don't often think about. These are all important aspects to cover. If a theme park attraction is uncomfortably hot, you're not going to feel particularly immersed in it. Or it might need to be hot, depending on the theme that it's trying to convey. Believability is important. Does the attraction successfully transport guests out of the real world and into the themed environment? How effectively does it minimize reminders of the outside world? There's consistency. Are there any breaks and immersions caused by inconsistencies in the theme? What surprises exist? Do they incorporate unexpected twists and effects and things like that capture your attention? Are there certain visual effects that really help bring this experience to life? How integrated is the technology with the environment? Some theme park attractions, for better or for worse, they like to showcase their technology, and it actually hurts the attraction at the end of the day because your attention is focused on, hey, that shiny new thing over there, whereas you forget that you're on a boat trying to go through Neverland. And the queue and pre-show is particularly important. I'm a big fan of pre-shows in theme park attractions. They help tell the story. They set the stage. It's kind of harsh when you walk through a theme park and then boom, suddenly you're on a ride without any lead up to it. So those are some aspects to think about. Storytelling, similarly, is there a cohesive narrative that ties the attraction together? How does the story begin, unfold? Are guests given a clear purpose within the experience? Role assignment. This is something we're going to talk about tonight, in fact. Do guests feel like active participants in the story? Do they have clear roles or tasks to fulfill? For example, are they explorers? Are they adventurers? Are they spectators within the virtual world? The visual storytelling aspect is important. Does the setting visually reinforce the story? Are the props, architecture, and landscapes designed to provide narrative cues? What about the message? We don't often think about the message in theme park attractions, but does it convey a deeper theme? Does it convey a moral? Is there a message that particularly resonates with you? Does the narrative resonate with universal themes of the theme park as a whole? We'll talk about Epic Universe in a future show and how that ties in. And finally, thematic fit. I talked about the queue and pre-show again too. How does the story align with the park's overall theme and the brand identity? For example, does it feel in place or does it feel out of place? And then finally, delight. What are the first impressions of the attraction? Does it have a wow factor that really immediately catches your attention? Does the attraction resonate with guests from an emotional point of view? Does it evoke nostalgia, excitement, and awe? How about the energy levels? Does the attraction maintain excitement throughout its duration? Does it have any dull or anticlimactic segments? How about memorable features? What aspects make it stand out? Are there signature moments, things that you really come to mind when you think about the attraction? And originality, does it introduce new ideas or themes or even technology to help it stand out? Replayability is a big one. Like we'll talk about tonight. Do guests feel inclined to revisit the attraction? There are some attractions that people are one and done and they're all set. And I say never again. And that hurts the delight factor. Accessibility is a very, very important one, especially in today's culture. Some theme park attractions simply aren't accessible to all of our guests, and we want to make sure that everybody feels included when they join these rides. And finally, it's ride length. Is it too short? Is it too long? Usually when a new ride shows up, we usually hear this first and foremost. Oh, I thought that was way too short. Oh my gosh, I went on forever. So these aspects help shape your sense of the delight of the attraction. So enough said of that. How I'm going to visually represent this is through what's known as a radar plot. So I have 3 different axes: immersion, storytelling, and delight. And you can see, depending on how it does, it'll shade in more of this triangle. The more of the triangle that's shaded, the better off it is. And that's how we're going to categorize some of these attractions. Now, there's one and only one math slide that I've got to talk about. And I apologize. I realize the audience is going to divide by half, but I've got to talk about it. So I'll go quick. How do we, once we've dissected these attractions into different pillars, how do we aggregate them together? How do we bring them back in? And how do we classify each of these against each other? Well, I thought about this a lot. You can't simply just take the average. The reason why, let's say you give a perfect score to immersion, perfect score to storytelling, but a goose egg for delight. Maybe it's just an unpleasant ride. Well, the average would be a 7, which seems really high for that kind of experience. So there's a mathematical concept, again, there's only one slide, called the geometric mean. And this allows us to actually multiply these factors together in a way that they help reinforce each other. So for example, if you have a weak pillar in one aspect, it'll bring down the score. If you have a strong pillars in all 3, then these pillars reinforce each other and the overall score will show how they build on each other. So it's a really good way that we can summarize how these different aspects multiply against each other. So that's our methodology that I'm taking for now. Now, the nice advantage of this is that we can add or change some of these pillars in the future. Maybe you'll have your own idea about what aspects of these attractions really resonate with you, and we can add those in the future. And the mathematics actually work behind it. So I would ask you, are there any criteria that you consider absolutely critical or table stakes when evaluating theme park attractions that you know and love? Now, I want to point out, this is not a monologue, even though it may have felt like one so far. I need your voice. At the end of the day, this is just my opinion, and I'm not going to just sit here and lecture for an hour. So let me share some things here. I have actually set up a website to collect your vote, and I'm hoping that you can contribute what you think about these attractions as we go along as well. Let me explain a little bit about what it looks like. I'll take this off. So here's the website. It is grandmiraculous.com. Not Grand and Miraculous. Unfortunately, that domain name was taken. Grumble, grumble. But anyway, if you go to grandmiraculous.com, you'll see a website that looks like this. Over here on the right is the radar plot I just talked about. It'll basically summarize the community analysis of what you all think about these rides. I would encourage you all to go right now, open up a new tab, go to grandmiraculous.com and click the vote button. And what you'll see is that you can actually change these sliders. So for example, let's say that you see an attraction that's not very immersive, but you thought it had a pretty good story and you're moderately happy with the delight of it. It'll calculate all this for you. Punch in the entry code. I put this in simply to avoid, people slamming the site with fake votes. Tonight is PPFD, and I'll put this up on the banner. Let me do that. There you go. Uppercase, lowercase, doesn't matter, but you can go ahead and go on the site right now, contribute your vote for how you feel about Peter Pan's flight, given the aspects that I talked about, and you can contribute your voice. Now, the idea is over time, let me remove this and I'll put it back up. The idea behind this is that we'll eventually be able to collect a community kind of rating of each of these attractions based on these pillars. And then we can start having some fun. We can start taking a look at how one attraction, how does it sort compared to other attractions using this methodology. Maybe at the end of the day, the methodology is junk, and that's okay. We'll learn something and we'll adapt. But, you know, you got to put a stake in the ground and start somewhere. So my ask is, please visit the website, contribute your vote, and yeah, you'll be able to affect the overall vote for these attractions. By the way, this is a brand new site. There may be bugs. If you happen to see any bugs, drop me a line. You know how to reach me, or in chat. But that's the idea behind it. All right. So again, I want to welcome in some guests who showed up. Dave Stragand is here. Hello, sir. Let's see if I see some other folks here. Dave's Disney Dreams is here. If you guys haven't subscribed to Dave's Disney Dreams, please go and subscribe to him. He's a stand-up gentleman. He's been very supportive. And Mr. Kai Layton, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming in. I see, oh, it's Ella Layton. Hello, how's it going? Dame Dystopia is in the house. Gloria is here, and so many other folks that I'll point out later. Again, thanks for showing up. Okay, so let's get going, huh? We're at the halfway mark. Let's talk about Peter Pan a little bit. So what I want to do, again, I want to make this interactive. So if you're in chat right now and watching this live, go ahead and type a single word, just one word that comes to mind when you think about this attraction. I'm assuming that most of you have been on it and or watched a ride through. I would love to actually show some of these ride throughs live on the channel. However, as a brand new content creator, I'm a little bit nervous about the algorithm. And so I will do this. I put together a playlist of some of these attractions that you can go watch at a later date. But for now, punch in a single word. It may be, well, I don't want to bias it. Go ahead and type a word of what you think about this attraction. And what I'll do later is that I'll create a word cloud out of these one-word opinions, and we'll see what we come up with. All right, let's talk a little bit about history. So, Peter Pan's flight. This is actually one of the OGs, if you're not familiar with it. It actually opened with Disneyland's opening day. Now, Disneyland itself opened with Fantasyland as its foundation. The idea of reliving moments from all of these animated films really brought people to the parks. We talk a lot about how IP is a controversial topic, and I'll include myself in that, but it really was the flywheel for the original park. The various animated films were really the engine that brought people in. Now, in September 1953, Disney presented his original plans for Disneyland to an investor, featuring a Peter Pan attraction in Fantasyland. Now, the film Peter Pan itself was relatively recent. It opened in 1953. Remember, Disneyland opened in 1955, and it became a huge worldwide hit. So put yourself in that perspective. You watch this brand new movie called Peter Pan, you love it, and then you hear about this new theme park opening. So put yourself in that mindset, and you think, oh my gosh, this is a brand new movie, and there's going to be a ride where I can actually experience life through Peter Pan. In 1954, hey, there's Dad. I want to say hi. Everybody say hi to Dad. John DeCure Jr. is in the chat. Hello. Thanks for coming. So in 1954, Walt wrote a letter to his sister, Ruth. Here you'll find Sleeping Beauty Castle, a number of fantastic rides. Everything here will be based on the idea of fantasy. We will recreate portions of Snow White, Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, which will be known as walkthroughs and fly-throughs in the case of Peter Pan. Now, in terms of background, it's what we call a rail-suspended dark ride, and it actually exists in 5 different theme parks. There's Disneyland, it opened in 1955. Magic Kingdom and Disney World opened in 1971. 2 days after opening. In fact, it was not an opening day attraction. It opened 2 days afterwards. Tokyo Disneyland opened in 83, Disneyland Paris in 92, and Shanghai Disneyland in 2016. And it happens to be located, surprise, surprise, in Fantasyland of each park. And keep in mind, like I mentioned, Disneyland opened only 2 years after the actual animated attraction. Now let's talk a little bit about some of these phenomenal people behind them. First and foremost is the amazing Herb Ryman. We'll talk a lot about Herb on this show, or as we call him, Herbie. Herbie was actually the mentor of my grandfather, and my dad knew him as well. He created some spectacular images that we'll go through later on, and he helped sketch the initial layout and the visual essence of the attraction, especially the exterior. Claude Coates, you may have heard of. Claude was really specialized in creating really atmospheric environments that transported guests into fantastical worlds. He was able to really provide the shine and the ability to make guests feel like they're part of a different world. And by the way, some of these names may be familiar to you. If you walk through the Haunted Mansion, some of these names are in puns on some of the tombstones. So some of these you may have heard of before. You may think, hey, that name sounds familiar. Ken Anderson is here. Ken Anderson was a fantastic designer, artist. He brought a whimsical touch to the layouts and visuals. In particular, he was instrumental in translating the film's animated sequences into three-dimensional spaces. In fact, a funny story, Anderson actually brought in, at the time that they were designing Peter Pan, he actually brought in a toy pirate ship, and he took some string and he hung it up by string. He's like, hey guys, what do you think about this? And if we actually, move this through the set? And at that moment, everybody knew, okay, gosh, we can't just have this be a ship going along the floor. We've got to be able to make this ship fly. And so he was one of the key people behind it. Marvin Davis. We're going to talk a lot about Marvin Davis. Now, some of you may think, oh, I know that guy, Mark Davis. Yeah, he's great. No. This is not Mark Davis. Mark Davis was one of the 9 original men, and he was an amazing legend in his own right. And in fact, he contributed heavily to Peter Pan. Marvin Davis was a phenomenal art director who worked at Fox and Disney. He actually created a plan of the attraction with scenes that featured Crocodile's Creek, Hangman's Tree. And the interesting thing idea that he brought to it was that the flying ships would eventually go through Skull Rock's actual face, which unfortunately was never happened. But you're going to hear a lot about Marvin Davis because he had an indelible impact to a lot of the parks. And there are many, many, many other Imagineers, but these are some of them. And I want to actually put some of these seeds in your head. You're going to hear some of these names over and over again. So we're hopeful that we can give you a primer on some of these amazing Imagineers. Now, the ride building itself, Herb Ryman was the creative mind behind the first iteration of the attraction. The original queue design featured London's themed streets and buildings to immerse guests into the setting. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that originally Walt Disney's vision for Fantasyland was quite different from what you see today at Disneyland. It was inspired by a Renaissance fair. It's characterized by large, colorful tents, bright and vibrant hues throughout the land. And Peter Pan embraced this aesthetic. For example, it had a decorative facade resembling a fairground. There was a small portrait of Peter Pan above the attraction sign, and ticket booths and canopies were called Middle Ages jousting events. I have a few pictures coming up that you'll be able to see. This is Herb Ryman's original map of Disneyland, in case you haven't seen it. The man was a master when it came to detail. And as you can see, it had grand plans for Fantasyland, with a giant wall and castles and the whole 9 yards. This was the original layout for Fantasyland, courtesy of the Disney Family Museum. You can kind of get a sense of the bright colors and all the tents and the kind of carnival atmosphere that Disneyland was originally built on. This was the original exterior for Peter Pan. Quite different from what we see today, at least for us people on the West Coast, huh? It may be more familiar to people on the East Coast, but the idea behind it was that there was a big medieval tent that people would line up for. And the nice thing is that the mural was visible from outside the tent. So the mural really brought people in as well. Now, what about the vehicle itself? The original concept envisioned, here's an interesting part about this attraction. The original concept envisioned people soaring through the ride as if they were Peter Pan. So it wasn't that you were just sitting on a ship watching the Peter Pan story. The idea was that you were the Pan. You were Peter Pan going through this attraction. So that's actually the way the attraction originally opened. There was no Peter Pan on the Peter Pan ride. So you can imagine some of the complaints that may have hit City Hall with people excited to see this ride. And then they said, hey, I lined up for this ride and there was no Peter Pan on the Peter Pan ride. Well, that's completely understandable. And then the designers scratched their heads and thought about it a bit. In fact, some of the early designs didn't have a pirate boat at all. It had a big maquette of Peter Pan that you would sit on his back and fly through the attraction about. So ultimately, given all the guest complaints and whatnot, the decision was made to use flying ships and maintaining the sense of flight while making the experience essentially more immersive. So Peter Pan was brought back to the ride. Everybody was happy. However, I'll point out that this kind of sabotaged the storytelling aspect to a small degree, and we'll talk about that later. Now, the ships themselves, it was a miniature fleet. It opened with a fleet of 9 different pirate ships, plus 1 extra for backup. These ships were not named. A lot of the other attractions had names. For example, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride had Toady and Badger and so forth. These were just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, there were color variations. Ships featured striking red and black designs, all with a skull and crossbones on their sails. This was very intentional, as most of the scenes were below and around the boat. The idea was not that people would stare straight ahead. They would look down at the scenery and everything going on. So that was a very intentional design choice. In terms of size and capacity, each ship was about 7 feet long, 4.5 feet wide, and it could accommodate 2 to 3 guests per ride, which will change in other parks that we'll talk about in a bit. They're made from fiberglass, and they're crafted from molds created by Chris Mueller. Now, each ship weighed approximately 250 pounds, so these were heavy-duty machines that had to go all day for many, basically 12 hours a day, if not more. Here's a sketch by Bruce Bushman of the original Peter Pan concept, and has some lovely detail to it. Here's a picture of the original Peter Pan vehicle. This was the actual clay sculpture that was molded by Chris Mueller. And if any of you have been on Peter Pan, you can appreciate all the detail in these vehicles. There are intricate details from the cannons on the bottom to the gold backing on the back. And here it is ready to be molded into 9 different vehicles. Here's a nice picture of Walt inspecting the vehicle, making sure it was ship shape, and you can kind of see how much detail was added. Now, the ride system itself was very innovative. As I mentioned, this was the first ride that really hung people from the ceiling. So the Imagineers were trying to scratch their heads and figure out, okay, how in the heck do we actually make this work from where we want to hang the guests? Well, much like any other rides, Imagineers looked to industry. There was a company called the Cleveland Tram Rail Company, and they actually had some technology that they used in factories. And that track design was based on the actual conveyor belts used in factories for material transport. Now, the Cleveland Tram Rail Company engineered the track and drive mechanisms that lifted guests above the ground, and each boat had a 1 horsepower electric motor. Now, it was invisible to guests. If you were boarding the boat, you wouldn't see it. However, the original system was very loud and very problematic. In fact, our friend Bob Gurr, has some funny stories where he recalled frequent redesigns and maintenance due to ongoing technical issues. Here's a fun picture of some early ride testing. So in 1954, Imagineer Bob Maddy and his team actually constructed a fake track, kind of a test track, inside the visual effects building at the Disney studio. Now, they had to do it at the studio because Fantasyland's dark rides weren't installed yet. So they had no place to really test. So they had to do it at the studio. And to stabilize the boats while guests boarded, they added a keel at the bottom, and the keel fits into a slot that slides along the floor. You've probably seen it if you've boarded the boat. So imagine driving past the Disney studio and seeing people, flying pirate ships on rails. That must have been fun. Here's an amazing picture of the ground being constructed of London. You can just look at this and just be bewildered by how much detail is here. It's phenomenal amount of detail, and one of the reasons that people keep coming back to this ride. Here's an early map of the ride progress. You can see the different scenes that people were brought through from Neverland to Skull Rock and so forth. And you can see from the very beginning, the idea was to fly through the Darling family nursery and then out into London. So in 1955, put yourself in this place, 4 months before Disneyland's opening. The poor Imagineers, Claude Coates, Ken Anderson, and others, they were working night and day to bring Peter Pan's flight to life. Now, due to time constraints, they really had to skip preliminary planning. Most of these attractions are very detailed pre-concepts and pre-visualizations. They didn't have time for any of that. So they had to direct ride creation immediately. So what they did was that they actually went on site and they detailed all the scenes straight from the creators' imaginations. Anderson himself says there wasn't enough time for a lot of preliminary planning. We just went in there and did them. Anderson and Coates painted images directly onto the wood itself, what they call plywood flats. And they used blacklight, which is a brand new technology at the time. In 1955, blacklight effects were a new and groundbreaking technology, and Disneyland was the first to really combine them with classic dark ride elements, which really brought more people to the parks. Now, the original ride structure had a 3-act format, and it set the foundation for all future versions. You had an opening scene where you have a brief glimpse inside the Darling Children's Nursery, and it was originally smaller than what we see today. The flight sequence had guests sail over moonlit London, much like the current attraction. It entered Neverland, seen entirely from an aerial perspective, without close-up scenes. And then you had the encounter at Skull Rock with Captain Hook. The final moment had Tick-Tock the crocodile, lurked with mouth agape as guests exited through a waterfall disguised door back to the loading area. So the original attraction didn't have Hook on top of Tick-Tock. Tick-Tock was actually a separate beast, just looking onward. Now, of course, when it comes to attractions, there are many fun, maybe not so fun stories about what, shall we say, more aggressive theme park visitors do to the attraction. Originally, the ships actually swung from side to side, and this became wildly popular with younger riders, as you can imagine. Bob Gurr has a fun anecdote where he says, a boat rocked so wildly that an external release pedal outside the boat's hull became lodged in the ride structure's drywall. And what that caused is that the boat actually got stuck. This completely stopped the attraction. And there was lots of other grad night mischief, as you can imagine. People were, they reached down and they teared off the top of Big Ben. Some kids were riding the ships standing up, and just swinging the boat from side to side. So poor Bob Gurr had to deal with all of that. They made the first renovation in 1960. Now, 1960 saw 5 full years of Disneyland in operation, and the feedback was fast and furious. For Peter Pan in particular, track technology required many regular upgrades, and a major renovation added newer tracks, sound systems, and lighting. Now, what about Disney World? We haven't talked about that yet. Imagineers Bill Martin and Bill Justice completed plans for Disney World's version in February 1971 and debuted with Disney World's grand opening. Now, the load-unload area, as you probably know, has an Omnimover style moving ramp, kind of like what you see at the airport, like a Haunted Mansion, to allow for a smoother flow of traffic. There were a few enhanced scenes, like the nursery scene, and expanded Neverland scenes as well. And slightly longer ride duration. They extended the experience to incorporate more movie scenes than Disneyland's original, including Peter Pan fighting Hook. That was not in the original attraction. In 1983, Disneyland had a major renovation called New Fantasyland, and they renovated the whole land, and they opened up with a completely new look. Instead of the old medieval tents they adopted a European storybook theme. It was reflected in the architecture. Now, Disney had originally envisioned a storybook village concept for Peter Pan's flight. Imagineers closely followed his early design ideas, and they used these ideas to shape the appearance in 1983. Now, the exterior was completely demolished and rebuilt, but the interior was mostly the same. They kept the track layout mostly the same. And I'll have some pictures along the line too. So they took some of the innovations done in Disney World and brought them into the Disneyland ride. They added a pirate ship deck scene where Peter and Hook duel, like I mentioned. And they added some other elements like Tiger Lily, Skull Rock, the Lost Boys, and so forth. Here's a picture of the actual demolition of the original Peter Pan's flight in 1982. So sad times if you got to know and love this facade, but they tore it apart, and you can slightly see some of the track inside that big hole there. What they came up with is this lovely image of a more of a kind of Gothic kind of look with Big Ben there in front and center. Now in 2015, there were changes as well in Disneyland. For example, instead of sitting on the bed, they actually made Wendy, John, and Michael fly against the wall, surrounded by sparkling pixie dust. There was also a more realistic green light introduced, flying around buildings. The London scene lighting upgrade was enhanced to make London basically glow more vibrantly. And they had waterfall and rainbow effects and things like that. And basically more pixie dust. They had lots of pixie dust animation introduced into the scene where Peter Pan steers a boat. There were additional changes at Walt Disney World, as some of you know, on the East Coast. Now, one of the problems was that wait times were a major issue due to limited ride capacity. The old queue was just an outdoor line with no entertainment for the guests. So what they added was a queue, essentially a magical interactive experience where you actually walk through a nighttime version of the Darling House before entering the nursery, where you can see their toys and their beds and the decorations. But what was cool was that they added some interactive special effects. For example, shadow play. You can ring bells using shadows. You had a new Tinkerbell effect, which was really magnificent. And a lot more hand-painted murals. So this is some of the pictures that those of you who are on the East Coast are probably very familiar with, but to add a nice touch to the queue and didn't force you just to wait in lines left and right. Now let's talk about some of the other parks. Tokyo and Paris have their own version of Peter Pan's flight. Tokyo Disneyland is sponsored by NTT, and Paris is slightly longer than the older versions in America and Japan. Now, one thing they changed in the Paris version is that the gondola, the pirate ship that you sit in, is actually seating 4 passengers. It has 2 benches instead of just 2 people left and right. And then there's Shanghai, the park that we love to talk about, because Shanghai, being the newest park, has some of the most intense attraction upgrades. It's arguably the most spectacular version they've come up with. So instead of aerial views, the ride begins in a London park at ground level at night, featuring swans from the movie, if you're familiar with the movie. There's some enhanced scenery, like the boat splashes into the water near Skull Rock. In the final scene, you actually fly straight into Big Ben. And there's lots of great projection mapping on the walls. So it uses these projection mappings alongside the animatronics to show the children flying across London in these vivid scenes. It's really spectacular, and I invite you to watch the online version of it. And part of your heart will feel bad because they're like, they get the best versions, which in this case is arguably true. They do a great job with it. Someone, a friend of mine asked, hey, is Nana in each of the versions in the different parks? And I'm happy to say that, yes, Nana is in all 5 versions. Maybe not originally, but you can see Nana here in Disneyland, in the Magic Kingdom, Tokyo Disneyland, Disneyland Paris, and of course, Shanghai. Now, the Shanghai version is special because Nana actually floats, and you can see some pixie dust underneath her as she floats. So that's the history. I hope you enjoyed some of that. I want to go back to chat briefly and say hello to T. Marie's Place. Thank you for coming in. I said a shout out to my dad earlier. Thanks for tuning in, Dad. Hope you're enjoying it. And Theme Park Casual, hello. I'm very, very grateful to you and Bob and Cordy and all of our West Coast creators. Lamont Gray, great to see you. And I think that's good for now. If I missed anybody, I'll catch you later. So let's talk briefly about analysis since time is running out. So clearly, Peter Pan is beloved by audiences around the world. There are consistently long wait times. The ride is probably one of the most popular attractions at all the parks. All of you have probably felt that kind of maybe not multi-hour, but at least exceeding an hour-long wait from time to time. It's been a fan favorite since Disneyland's opening in 1955, and it remains beloved today. The ride exists in 5 out of 6 Disney resorts worldwide, with unique variations in each park. The only resort that doesn't have it is Hong Kong. It has a magical flying experience, as you all know. The suspended ride system creates an immersive feeling of flight. And of course, it has nostalgic appeal, based on the 53 Disney film. So how do we start tearing this attraction apart and analyzing it? So let's take it one by one. In terms of immersion, I give this an 8 out of 10. And the reason, the theming is a richly detailed fairy tale environment. The motion is perfect. It's a gentle suspended ride system. You know, Bob Gurr may complain about some of the earlier versions, but for the most part, it simulates the sensation of true flight. Transitions are great. There are seamless scene shifts that maintain a continuous journey. Sound, temperature, and lighting, I don't have any complaints about that, especially the lighting. The lighting is magnificent, and it focuses your eyes on exactly what it needs to do. The believability, there are stylized yet sincere details. Every element is meticulously aligned with the Peter Pan story. There are many delightful details for some of you who love talking about some of the hidden details. They introduced blacklight, which is a huge deal. Those of us who are used to blacklight will probably think, what's the big deal? But back in 55, this was a huge innovation. And from an integration point of view, it's masterful. Now I have to call out the queue in the pre-show in Disney World. Obviously, the queue in pre-show isn't quite as grand in some of the other parks, but in Disney World, they really did a great job. So overall, I give it an 8. Storytelling, I give a 6. And you may think, oh my gosh, John, why is that so low? In fact, it's not so low. It's a good score. And from a cohesive narrative point of view, it's an enchanting journey. There's no question about that. The reason I dipped its score a little bit is about what I talked about earlier in the show. It was originally designed for guests to step into the ride as Peter Pan. Its later shift to a fixed protagonist clarifies the tale, but it really kind of softened the actual role assignment that was originally intended in the ride. Visual storytelling, message, cue, thematic fit, I have no arguments with. It's only the original change to take you out of the notion of being Peter Pan and to put you in a pirate ship that I take slight exception with. That's the only thing I'll ding it on. When it comes to delight, I give it an 8. There's no question that this ride delights everybody. Maybe not to the point where, you know, you felt like you walked off a roller coaster, but from an emotional point of view and first impressions, there are so many people who talk about this ride, including Ray Bradbury, that we'll talk about in a moment. So overall, I give this a 7.27 using our formula. You may disagree with that. You may think that's too low. You may think that's too high, and that's totally cool. We're all here to essentially talk about how these methodology fits our attractions. For now, I would encourage you to think about other attractions. Which ones would be higher or lower than the score in your mind? Let's take a quick peek at the website, if I may. And I will remove this and add this to the stage. And let me hit refresh. So we've gotten 8 votes so far with an overall score of 7.4. So slightly higher than what I anticipated. But yeah, this reflects everybody's votes that you've contributed so far. So I want to thank everybody who went to the website and contributed. Feel free, please, as time goes on, to contribute your vote. And we'll start tracking these attractions against each other as time goes on. So I want to end with a few words from Tony Baxter. Tony Baxter is a legendary Imagineer, as some of you know. And he has some amazing words about this ride. Let me just read them verbatim if you can forgive me. All of these things are kind of like what a magician does, which is throwing the focus. I think Disneyland has mastered that. By the way, let me get rid of the banner since you've all been watching that for so long. I think Disneyland has mastered that. Probably the simplest one is Peter Pan. I've got to sit down and measure the square footage on that. I would say it's probably no more than a large home. It's pretty small. There's about 3 rooms in there. But by turning out all the lights and telling you that you're flying out of a bedroom window, out over London, and then off to the stars, it can go so profound as to get someone like Ray Bradbury to write Walt Disney and to say just that, quote, "Today I will be eternally grateful because I flew out of a child's bedroom window, out over moonlit London, in a galleon on its way to the stars," unquote. You're thinking about this poet, this writer, this inspirational mind who was completely captivated by that. It's weird to me because obviously ride technology and sophistication are way, way beyond Peter Pan. But I can tell you right now, the park is open and there's about 40 minutes of people waiting in line for it. That would be a good line these days. I can guarantee that without being at Disneyland, people are willing to suspend that disbelief and buy into what it does offer, because the thought of doing that is so compelling. It's such a compelling experience that they're willing to overlook the shortcomings of it. And that's probably one of the nicest things you can say about an attraction. I want to tease next week. Next week, we'll be sailing up the River of Denial and finding out if there's really a backside of water on the world famous Jungle Cruise. So I hope you'll join me again next week. I hope you had some fun tonight, and we'll apply the same methodology and see if it works. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but we'll try and tackle that one. I want to answer the trivia question too. So the original trivia question I asked at the front of the show was, what was the original ticket category of Peter Pan's flight? It was actually a C ticket, and that may surprise you. You may think, oh my gosh, how was it not an E ticket or a D ticket at least? Well, in 1955, it's kind of a trick question. In 1955, there were only A to C tickets. C was the highest ticket you can get. So at the time, it was the best ticket you could have. D tickets were introduced in 1956, and the famed E tickets were introduced in 1959. So Peter Pan's flight got bumped up to a D ticket status at that point. So if you mention D ticket, you get partial credit. But when the park actually opened, it was C ticket. I want to end tonight with a quote from Ray Bradbury. We mentioned him tonight. You'll hear a lot about Ray Bradbury as the show goes on. And this was taken from his original script for Spaceship Earth. And it really encapsulates some of the concepts and the emotions that we're trying to appeal to on this show. Gather round the next great campfire. Let us seek and know and understand and dream a new book, a new instruction book to fly great Spaceship Earth through the uncharted seas of the future world. Lock into dream that is your own. Find what truth is in your blood and beat a path from here to there. Your life is yours to own and be. The world is yours to shape and change. The stars are yours as just reward. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Please remember to hit that like, subscribe, and share out the channel if you enjoyed yourself tonight. Now, for our ending, let's take a quick peek at some attractions that we all know and love and some of the artistic inspiration behind each of them. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll see you next week.